Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of our blog. Today I thought it'd be useful, following on from a previous blog, to show you some of the planning tools we use when we travel along the inland waterways. First of all, I must say that we are not affiliated to any of the boat hire companies that we mention, or indeed any of the books or maps that I talk about or show you. We're not sponsored by anybody, these are just our personal views. So, first of all, one of the things I wanted to share with you is the Nicholson's Guide. And they publish these for most of the inland waterways in the UK. We haven't used these a huge amount, although we did use it on the Cheshire Ring a couple of years ago. And they've got things like footpaths and main roads printed on them. So as an example, this is what one of the pages looks like. And it's just not for me, but for some people, this is their bread and butter. So if this is for you, then great. Along your route, sometimes you might find leaflets. We picked this one up on the Macclesfield Canal, just outside of Harecastle Tunnel. And this was quite useful actually. I think we paid £1 for it. And it gave us some brief history of the canal and also gave us a really handy little map. So keep your eyes open. Sometimes along the route, there's some really useful books and maps that you can also pick up with some information that might not necessarily be printed in the guidebooks. Some of the other sources that you might find information are in things like books and magazines. So this is one that we picked up recently, and it's got 100 lists of canal routes with maps and information about various journeys. It's got pubs, restaurants along the route, information about the locks, boat hire places, all sorts of bits and pieces. So this is just an example of one of the pages. So quite interesting, quite useful, and if you're planning over the winter months about where you might want to go, where you want to hire from, this could be quite useful. Or indeed, you don't have to be a hirer, you could be somebody that's perhaps continually cruising, and this sort of information can be quite helpful to plan your journey for the next 12 months or so. So the last two things that I want to talk to you about, I should probably spend a bit more time on. The first one are the Pearsons Guides, and we've got a whole raft of them. We haven't got all of them yet. For Scott, they're his go-to. For me, I like to use them in collaboration with the Heron maps, which I'll show you. So the Pearsons Guide covers obviously an area, and then inside the front cover it shows you a map of the UK waterways, and then also a map of the area that the book is focusing on. Each individual page gives you a description, and it points out some of the key places along the route. Not everything is covered on here. Sometimes Heron maps have got things that the Pearsons Guide doesn't. It also points out things like water points, winding holes, railway stations, pubs, and any towns. And if it's a particularly large town, it will give you an enlarged map. We also annotate on these as well, so if there's things that are missing, we'll quite often add our own description and details on, so if we ever want to come back, we know there's things there. Along the top of the page, it gives you an approximate distance and journey time. These are really useful for when you're calculating how far you want to go or where you need to be by a certain time. So these are the Heron Guides, and actually I discovered these long before the Pearsons Guides. And they're a big concertina map. And unfold, something like this. One of the drawbacks to these is usually after a week, they're in absolute tatters, and obviously if it rains, that's it, they're destroyed. So you can cover them in sticky back plastic or put loads of sellotape on them, but just bear that in mind that they don't last particularly well. The Pearsons Guides are a little bit more resilient, but after all they are only paper, and usually by the end of the week they've definitely come apart from their cover. So we usually end up having to sellotape these together as well. Again, if it's raining, then you might want to think about things like a plastic bag or pocket to put them in, particularly if you're going to be cruising in the rain and the damp. So this is a Heron map, and we've used this for part of the Kennet and Avon Canal, so it's a little bit worn, as you can see. However, I just want to point out some of the key features on here. On the canal or river, you've got these white diamonds, and they roughly depict about a mile. The speed limit on the canal is about 3 miles an hour. So you can expect to be doing roughly 3 diamonds an hour. However, if you start adding in things like locks and swing bridges, or even queues, then obviously your timing is going to extend. So here I've got an example of lots and lots of locks. The map doesn't really tell you how long it's going to take you to do the set of locks. But what it does do is it gives you a very good representation of how many there are and how quickly they come up. The map gives you lots of further information, which is depicted by the red star. What you need to do is somewhere on the map itself is find that information, and it's a bit like looking for a needle in a haystack. Now this is where the map and the Pearsons Guide come in handy together, because you've got the information printed on the map, but in the Pearsons Guide, it actually tells you how long you can expect to take. The Pearsons Guide also quite helpfully gives you some pictures, so you can at least recognise where you might be if all else fails. Equally, the Heron maps do this too, although not quite so prolifically. Heron maps have a nice key at the back, which shows you all the information that their map covers. They're a relatively small scale at 1 to 50,000, so bear this in mind as well. A couple of other things to think about then when you're planning your route. Some places you'll find there's lots of volunteers who are eager to help you. That's fantastic if you're on your own, perhaps aren't quite so fit as others, or indeed you just want a bit of help to get along on your journey. However, you need to plan for there not being volunteers, particularly in some remote areas, and you've got to do all the work yourself. So for us, we did the Tardy Big Lock flight a couple of years ago, and there wasn't a volunteer in sight. It took us about 4 hours, and there were 5 of us constantly operating locks during that time. Places like the River Thames below Oxford, you'll find all the locks are electric. And whilst this is great just to push a button, it does take a considerably long time for the locks to fill and drain. If you're planning on venturing onto a river, they can be beautiful, but obviously be warned. If there's been a lot of heavy rain, you could find yourself stopped because of flooding. And you also want to consider towpaths or lack of. So if you've got a dog or any other kind of pet that perhaps needs to get off the boat and have a walk, you won't find these in quite so many places on a river, and you'll need to plan accordingly. Whereas on a canal, you can obviously pull over just about anywhere, hop off and walk along the towpath. The other key thing that I've noticed when using both Heron and Pearsons products is Heron do print some of the bridge numbers but not all of them, whereas in the Pearsons Guide there's normally a bridge number for every single bridge. And if you've broken down anywhere, or indeed need to tell anybody where you are, it's really helpful to know which bridge you've just been under. The other quite helpful thing with the Pearsons Guide is they do sometimes list and annotate bridges that are no longer in existence, and that can be quite helpful. Having the necessary books and guides on board is essential for when you're coming up to things like bridges and tunnels. When coming up to a tunnel, sometimes it's not two-way, and you'll have to pull over and wait until your allotted time, or indeed phone up somebody, usually the CRT, and book your passage. Again, the book and the map will usually tell you this and give you a phone number. Some bridges you will need to operate because they're too low to allow you to pass underneath. The map and the guidebook will tell you what the height restriction is and if you need to operate them. All in all, it helps to have a variety of products with you when you're planning and executing your voyage. You'll find that you can't take enough with you, particularly if you need to change your mind for any reason. So our tip is to take more books and maps than you're probably going to need. That way you're covered for every eventuality. I hope you found this useful. Do leave a comment below if you agree with us, or perhaps you've got some tips that you would like to share. We're really interested to hear.
If you've enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please do hit the subscribe button. And why not tap on the bell to receive notifications for when the next video is uploaded? It really means a lot to us.